In the dead of night, an upscale São Paulo home was destroyed. A well-off nuclear family was torn apart when a killer entered and left behind a scene of such horror that it will be talked about for months. 2 lives ended brutally and 1 was mysteriously spared. The daughter, alone, grieving, left to pick up the pieces of what was lost. But something doesn't add up. Why was she untouched? Why does she seem so calm? And wait, what is she doing hanging out with the very man who murdered her parents? This is not what you expected. A late-night break-in, alarms turned off, parents murdered while the children remained safe.
O que será que tem a dizer hoje a menina bem-nascida que é acusada de ter participado da morte dos pais em outubro de 2002 em São Paulo? O que ela tentou dizer e o que ela tentou esconder? E o que os advogados esperavam dessa entrevista? É o que você vai ver agora.
Furar o bloqueio formado em torno de Suzanne von Richthofen não foi fácil. Desde que saiu da cadeia, em junho do ano passado, a jovem tem contado com a proteção deste homem, Denivaldo Barney, amigo da família Richthofen. Ela começa a entrevista mostrando fotos de amigos e da família.
How did we even get here? Let's rewind. Born into privilege and prestige, Suzanne von Richthofen was the daughter of Manfred von Richthofen, a respected German engineer and state executive, and Mauricia von Richthofen, a Brazilian psychiatrist of Lebanese and Italian descent. Suzanne studied law at the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo and by all appearances lived a disciplined life alongside her younger brother, Andreas. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Suzanne von Richthofen met the man of her dreams when she was just a teenager. He was older, charming, wild in a way that probably felt thrilling to someone raised in such a strict, structured home. He rode a motorcycle, had tattoos, and didn't seem to care what anyone thought. It was the kind of rebellion that felt like freedom. It all began with an innocent walk through Ibirapuera Park. A sunny afternoon in August 1999, Manfred and Mauricia Richthofen strolled through the trees with their children, Suzanne and little Andreas. That's when fate stepped in. They crossed paths with a young man named Daniel Cravinhos, a lean, soft-spoken aeromodeling enthusiast, flying his handcrafted airplanes. Andreas, intrigued, asked to learn more. The Richthofens agreed. Daniel became a regular at their home. He was patient with Andreas, treating him like a kid brother, taking him biking, racing model cars, talking dreams. It all seemed so wholesome, but behind the charm, something darker was brewing. According to friends, Andreas actually helped his sister get closer to Daniel. It started with a note passed through Andreas, and suddenly Daniel wasn't just the boy teaching model airplanes. He was Suzanne's boyfriend. At first, Manfred and Mauricia weren't concerned. Teen love, they thought. It'll pass. But it didn't. Andreas continued tagging along, and then it spiraled into a parent's worst nightmare. Andreas once hid in the trunk of Daniel's car to sneak into a love hotel with his sister and Daniel. He smoked cannabis with them in public parks. They introduced him to marijuana for the first time. He wasn't just a little brother anymore. He was a witness to everything. Suzanne and Daniel quickly became inseparable. By the age of 16, she'd lost her virginity to him. They started smoking weed daily, experimenting with ecstasy. She stopped attending parties, stopped seeing her friends, unless Daniel came too. By the time she entered law school at PUC, Daniel was practically glued to her side, even accompanying her class to legal forums and state assemblies. Classmates called them obsessive. Daniel's own friends said he began missing training sessions just to be with her. His bedroom at home told the whole story. Dozens of photos of them together, stuffed animals, a pillow with her face printed on it. It wasn't just young love, it was obsession. And obviously, Manfred and Mauricia were growing uneasy. Daniel's lifestyle raised red flags. He scraped by building and selling 1 or 2 airplanes a month. He couldn't support himself. let alone a future family. And his brother, Christian, was even worse, battling cocaine addiction, indebted to drug dealers, and working as a police informant. When Suzanne started asking for extra money to lend to a friend, her father grew suspicious. He discovered she was spending it all on Daniel. Gifts, clothes, loans. They tried to intervene and begged her to break up with him, warned her about his drug use, but by then she was in too deep. Desperate to stay with Daniel, Suzanne began lying to her parents, telling them she was going to study with friends while sneaking off to love hotels. Her friends covered for her until one night her mother called to check in. The lie crumbled. Maricia confronted her daughter the next morning. Suzanne admitted everything. That's when they made a decision. Enough was enough. Daniel was banned from their daughter's life. Suzanne promised to end it. She even removed the ring Daniel had given her. But behind their backs, the relationship continued. But this is when she grew distant. Gone were the long chats with her mother. Gone was the closeness she once had with her family. Every visit with Daniel ended in a screaming match. In July 2002, while her parents were away for a month, and for Suzanne, the experience was a dream. Just her and Daniel living as if they were free. When Manfred and Maricia returned, Suzanne demanded that her father buy her an apartment so that she could live with her boyfriend comfortably. Appalled at the entitlement, Manfred refused. She needed to finish her degree, get a job, and do it herself, he argued. Suzanne was not having it. She didn't just want freedom, she wanted them gone. By September 2002, things had spiraled. The police were called to the Richthofen home 3 times to break up fights between Manfred and Daniel. The last time, they arrived at 2 a.m. in the quiet neighborhood of Campobello. Manfred, furious, stood at the gate in slippers and a crumpled shirt, yelling at Daniel. Suzanne tried to play peacemaker, but the rage was visible. "I'm going to beat this kid up," Manfred told officers. Daniel shot back, "I feel like beating this old man." What the police didn't know was that this tension was just the surface of a volcano, and it was about to erupt. At her parents' funeral, Suzanne appeared devastated, dressed in black, head low, and with Daniel at her side. The same ring her father had begged her to take off, now glinting on her finger. To the world, she was the grieving daughter. But inside that church, standing over the bodies of her murdered parents, Suzanne was already a killer. Daniel, once her entire world, would soon begin to drift. A letter he wrote to her in 2004 read, "I don't know why you don't talk to my parents or me anymore. Could it be that you don't trust me anymore?" Their love, once the spark that ignited the murder, was already fading, and the truth? It was about to explode. 'Twas the night before Halloween, October 30th, 2002, when what began as a teenage romance spiraled into one of Brazil's most haunting and calculated family murders. The air was thick with tension as Suzanne and Daniel Cravinhos reviewed their plan one final time. It wasn't a decision made in the heat of passion or during a sudden outburst. This was meticulous, methodical, cold. They had already toyed with the idea of using a gun, even testing the sound it would make days prior. But it was too loud and too risky. They needed silence, something up close and personal. They decided on hollow iron bars. Earlier that day, they had spoken with Daniel's brother, Christian Cravinhos. Still on the fence, Christian wasn't sure if he had the stomach to go through with it, but Daniel gave him the address and instructions. If he wanted in, he had to wait by a specific street near an internet cafe where they'd be dropping off Suzanne's 15-year-old brother, Andreas. Andreas, innocent and unaware, was lured away with a sweet deception. His sister promised him a fun night at the cafe, telling him they'd be celebrating her birthday at a motel, and that she'd even convince their parents to let him skip school the next day, a night off from homework, a slice of freedom. He had no idea he was being removed from the chessboard. Christian arrived at the cafe first, at 10:12 p.m., and left before Andreas could spot him. An hour later, the trio, Suzanne, Daniel, and Christian, met nearby, slipped into Suzanne's car, and headed toward the von Richthofen mansion. Suzanne had prepared everything. In the days leading up to the murder, she had already disabled the alarm system and turned off the security cameras. There would be no footage, no evidence of their arrival. The house, normally a fortress, was left wide open for slaughter. Just after midnight, they pulled into the garage. The murder weapons were already hidden in the car. Daniel and Christian changed into sweatshirts and women's tights, cheap attempts at forensics proofing. Suzanne led them inside, quietly turned on the hallway light, and pointed them upstairs. Her parents, Manfred and Maricia, lay sleeping. She handed them garbage bags, surgical gloves, and plastic to wrap their weapons. Then she disappeared into the lower floor, far from the bloodbath to come. The two brothers entered the bedroom like shadows. Daniel turned to Manfred, Christian to Maricia. The first blows landed hard and fast. Manfred died immediately. But Maricia fought back. She screamed. She clawed. 3 of her fingers broke as she raised her hands to protect herself. She begged them to spare her children, unaware one of them had invited death through her front door. They stood over the bodies, breathless and bloodied. Daniel placed Manfred's own revolver beside his lifeless hand, draped a towel over his face. It was all a performance. Suzanne had left a trash bag on the staircase. The brothers shoved their clothes and the murder weapons inside. They scrubbed the iron bars in the swimming pool, washing away the gore. Meanwhile, Suzanne raided her parents' bedroom. She knew the code to her father's leather briefcase. Inside were 8,000 reais, 6,000 euros, and 5,000 euros dollars. She took it all. Then, to stage the scene as a robbery, Daniel slashed the briefcase open with a knife. They left jewels scattered, untouched, and the revolver, the very one Daniel had just used as a prop, conveniently placed near the body. For Christian's help, he was given his cut, cash, and jewelry, before being dropped near his grandmother's apartment. Then came the final act, the alibi. Suzanne and Daniel headed to the Colonial Motel on Avenida Ricardo Jaffe, booking the presidential suite. They paid about 300 reais, ordered a Coke and a ham sandwich. Daniel even requested a receipt, his very first one from a motel. The timestamp showed timings between 1:36 a.m. to 2:56 a.m. Afterwards, they returned to the cafe and picked up Andreas. As part of the plan, they brought him home, pretending to be shocked by the open doors. Inside, Suzanne handed her little brother a kitchen knife and told him to wait outside. She made calls to her boyfriend, then to her house. No answer. They kept calling, or should we say, performing. At exactly 4:09 a.m., Daniel called the police. He claimed he was outside his girlfriend's house and believed there had been a robbery. Officer Alexandre Paulino Boto was the first to respond. He described the crime scene as amateur. Jewelry, phones, even a gun were left behind. A thief wouldn't leave a weapon on the floor, he noted. He was more disturbed by Suzanne's emotionless face. As the clock ticked past 4:30 a.m., the crime scene at the von Richthofen mansion was still thick with eerie silence. The possibility of a thief still lurking in the shadows hung over them like a fog. But nothing in the house prepared them for what they were about to find. Downstairs, the library was in shambles. Books toppled, papers scattered, furniture upended. A clumsy attempt at staging a break-in. The living room and kitchen, by contrast, were immaculate and untouched. The officers ascended the staircase, the heavy stillness of the upper floor pushing down on them. They stepped into what was clearly a girl's room, likely Suzanne's. Her closet had been turned over. stuffed animals flung across the floor like a mockery of lost innocence. Next, a tidy room with a model airplane suspended from the ceiling, young Andreas's room, untouched, almost peaceful, save for 3 pillows oddly arranged under a sheet. A feeble attempt to suggest he'd been asleep there all along, but nothing prepared Bodo for what he saw next. They opened the door to the master bedroom. Manfred von Richthofen lay motionless on the bed, a revolver placed carefully by his hand. At first glance, it might have looked like suicide, but something felt off. Then Bodo pulled back the sheets. There was a second body, Maricia, hidden under the covers. Suicide was ruled out immediately. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a tragic murder-suicide. This was a double homicide. The officers, fearing the psychological shock that might follow for the 2 teenagers outside, quickly called for a rescue vehicle. It was now close to dawn. In a bizarre twist, Daniel's family had already arrived at the mansion, offering comfort and warmth. Daniel, playing his part, was asked to break the news to Suzanne and Andreas. He gathered them close, whispered, and the trio bowed their heads together. Andreas quietly drifted from the group, seemingly in a fog of confusion and grief. Meanwhile, Suzanne asked what procedures we were going to take, not what happened, not if her parents were okay. When Bodo told her, perhaps instinctively, "They're fine," she looked stunned. "How?" she asked. Daniel arrived soon after, asking oddly specific questions. Was anything taken? Was the briefcase with the cash missing? The couple's masks eventually slipped, but not before they tried to write the ending themselves. A story of robbery, of coincidence. But no thief had come for the von Richthofens that night. Their own daughter had. By 5 a.m., the media was already buzzing outside. Astrogildo Cravinhos, Daniel and Christian's father, stepped forward, giving statements to the press, while the children of the murdered couple were taken to the police station. The tragedy was quickly turning into a circus, but the most disturbing scenes were yet to unfold. Inside the police station, while the air hung heavy with tension and trauma, Suzanne leaned comfortably against Daniel's shoulder and took a nap. Andreas, in stark contrast, looked shattered, curled in on himself, silent, shaken, processing what his 15-year-old mind could barely comprehend. Meanwhile, Suzanne and Daniel exchanged affectionate touches, like giddy teenagers at a sleepover. Not just once. Over and over, cuddles, whispers, kisses, right there in front of the police officers, the witnesses, the press, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't orchestrated every moment of the night before. As they filed their official statement, Suzanne turned to the police chief, Dr. Enjolras Relo de Araujo. Her voice soft, almost playful, she declared, "I would like you to kill and torture these people that killed my parents." Then she smiled at Daniel. It was a smile that haunted everyone in the room. Because in that single glance, filled with irony, audacity, and cold delight, it became clear she wasn't mourning. She was performing. From the very beginning, the scene inside the von Richthofen mansion didn't add up. To the seasoned investigators of the Homicide and Personal Protection Department, DHPP, this wasn't the work of professional burglars. It was the clumsy staging of a crime meant to look like a robbery. But something was off. Too many things were left behind. Expensive jewelry scattered but untouched, electronics in plain sight, a revolver placed delicately next to a corpse. It all screamed performance, and the detectives knew. When a crime scene looks too carefully crafted, it usually is. So the investigation zeroed in, not on strangers, but on the people closest to the victims, the children, the maid, Maricia's patients, Manfred's colleagues, and one name, one connection, stood out more than any other: Daniel Cravinhos, Suzanne's boyfriend. It didn't take long for the detectives to start peeling back the layers of that relationship. According to close family friends, Manfred and Mauricia had strongly disapproved of the romance. Manfred, an engineer with conservative values, had a particular distaste for Daniel, who came from a very different social world and had a less than promising future. Under her mother's insistence, Suzanne had even broken up with Daniel once before, only to rekindle the flame in secret. That secret, it seemed, had become dangerous. On November 4th, 2002, Suzanne was summoned for a second round of questioning. She arrived at the DHPP with the same composed demeanor she'd shown in earlier days. Cool, calm, almost calculated. Investigators weren't looking for tears. They were looking for cracks. The interrogation lasted around 2 hours. The goal was to sift through her earlier statements and catch any inconsistencies. Investigators noted her tone, her choice of words, her body language. Suzanne played her part, but her composure was too perfect. And when a grieving daughter keeps her story straighter than the police expect, suspicion only grows. Then came the twist no one expected. While the detectives were tightening their circle, a new lead emerged. Christian Cravinhos, Daniel's older brother, had recently bought himself a brand new motorcycle. It was flashy, expensive, and deeply suspicious. Just days after the double murder, how could he suddenly afford such a purchase? The investigators didn't hesitate. They brought Christian in for questioning, and at the same time, Daniel. Suzanne's boyfriend had been under scrutiny since day one, but now the walls were truly closing in. And then the house of cards collapsed. On November 8th, 2002, all three, Christian, Daniel, and Suzanne, confessed. It was unexpected. A daughter, privileged and poised, had plotted the cold-blooded murder of her own parents. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just shake a family, it shakes an entire nation. Nearly 4 years after Manfred and Mauricia von Richthofen were bludgeoned to death in their sleep, the courtroom became the final stage for one of Brazil's most infamous murder trials. The eyes of a nation turned to São Paulo on July 17, 2006, as the trial of Suzanne von Richthofen, her boyfriend Daniel Cravinhos, and his brother Christian Cravinhos commenced. What followed was 5 days of psychological warfare, courtroom theatrics, tearful breakdowns, and brutal revelations. Originally scheduled for June 5th, 2006, the trial had already faced disruption. The Cravinhos brothers' lawyers didn't appear in court, claiming they hadn't had adequate time to prepare. Shortly after, Suzanne's own defense team withdrew over a missing witness. Delays were piling up, but the judge wasn't going to let this trial collapse again. With a backup defense team appointed and house arrest lifted from Suzanne, the court reconvened a month later, ready for war. From the outset, Suzanne's testimony tried to shift blame entirely onto the Cravinhos brothers. She claimed to have been high on the night of the murders, unaware of any murder plot, and painted herself as a manipulated, naive girl, entangled with an overly jealous boyfriend. She said Daniel tried to kill himself over their long-distance relationship, and that she had funded his lifestyle with her parents' money. At one point, she claimed people at their model airplane club called her the golden goose of the Cravinhos family. But Daniel had a different version, one that would devastate Suzanne's narrative. According to him, she was the mastermind. He said Suzanne had long fantasized about a life free of her parents' rules and punishments, even claiming she had suffered physical and sexual abuse at their hands, allegations she would later deny. Christian, trying to reduce Daniel's culpability, claimed only his brother had committed the murders. But this story, too, would change in the days to come. Then Andreas von Richthofen, the youngest in the family, took the stand. His voice, though steady, echoed devastation. He denied any abuse from their parents and insisted their family was normal. Andreas revealed that he was emotionally manipulated into forgiving his sister, something he deeply regretted. He didn't believe her repentance. He feared her. They say she's a psychopath. I don't know. But you can expect anything from a person like that. Suzanne had even tried to blame the murder weapon on him, a blatant lie Andreas claimed. Police Chief Cynthia Tucunduva Gomez testified that the killings were likely simultaneous, discrediting Christian's earlier version of Daniel acting alone. And even more chilling, after her confession, Suzanne had calmly combed her hair and asked Daniel if she looked pretty for her mugshot. Nadia Cravinhos, the mother of Daniel and Christian, gave a tearful, complicated testimony. She spoke of her shame, forgiveness, and the manipulation of her sons. She claimed Manfred and Mauricia were abusive alcoholics and backed the theory of SA. Hours later, Christian recanted his earlier statements, now admitting he had struck Mauricia himself and that Suzanne had orchestrated the entire plan. She'd told them she had no life under her parents and claimed her father tried to SA her when she was 13. Christian sobbed as he recalled her words after the murders. "You didn't take anything from me. You gave me a new life." The fourth day brought forensic photos that left the courtroom shaken. The brutality of the crime became undeniable. Suzanne, Daniel, and Christian all turned their backs to avoid the images of Manfred's mutilated face and Mauricia's slow, agonizing death. Love letters between Suzanne and Daniel were read aloud, filled with intimate nicknames and declarations. Daniel wept. Suzanne stayed stone-faced, turning her chair away from her former lover. Her detachment was glaring. The prosecution emphasized how quickly the trio moved on after the murder. Daniel and Suzanne kissed passionately at the police station, while Christian celebrated with a barbecue and a motorcycle purchase. In the early hours of July 22, 2006, Judge Alberto Anderson Filho announced the verdicts. Suzanne von Richthofen was convicted of double homicide, deemed cold, calculating, and fully responsible for the crime. Daniel and Christian Cravinhos were also found guilty, not as manipulated pawns, but as willing executioners. Suzanne got 39 years and 6 months in prison. Daniel Cravinhos got 39 years and 6 months. Christian Cravinhos got 38 years and 6 months. A chilling irony hung in the air. The very inheritance Suzanne hoped to unlock with her parents' deaths would now fund her prison meals. After her arrest and conviction, Suzanne spent 16 years behind bars at the Penitenciaria Feminina, Santa Maria Eufrasia Pelletier, in Tremembe, São Paulo. On January 11, 2023, she was released on probation and slipped into a quieter life, at least temporarily.
De mãos dadas com o protetor, fala sobre a relação com o ex-namorado Daniel Cravinhos.
Eu me arrependo muito.
Você acha que se você não tivesse conhecido o Daniel, nada disso teria acontecido na sua vida?
Não, nada disso, nada disso.
Suzanne olha para Barney. A entrevista continua. Ela diz ter sido manipulada pelo ex-namorado.
She initially retreated to rural Angatuba, where some of her ex-boyfriend's relatives resided, living largely out of the public eye. But it didn't last long. Just a month later, Suzanne re-entered headlines when she launched an online store, drawing sharp public criticism for trying to profit from a life forever associated with one of Brazil's most infamous crimes. Now living in Bragança Paulista, Suzanne has taken on a new identity. Literally and figuratively, she entered a relationship with local Dr. Felipe Zecchini Muniz, a divorced father of 3, and in March 2023, became pregnant with their first child. She gave birth to a baby boy named Felipe at Sabin Hospital in Atibaia. In a move many saw as an attempt to distance herself from her past, Suzanne legally changed her name to Suzanne Louise Magnani Muniz adopting her maternal grandmother's surname and that of her partner. And yet, one haunting truth remains. A daughter, born into wealth and opportunity, traded it all for a twisted fantasy of freedom. Was it manipulation, greed, trauma, or pure evil? Whatever the answer, the von Richthofen murders remain one of Brazil's darkest tales, not just because of the crime, but because of why it was committed. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.